Papa Chibou loves his job as night watchman at the Wax Museum. But how will he cope when the museum has to close? Richard Connell, today on the Classic Tales podcast. Welcome to the Classic Tales podcast. Thank you for listening. The vintage episode for the week is The Minister's Black Veil by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Be sure to check it out on Tuesday. If you have found value in the show, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Help us to help other folks like you. Please go to classictalesaudiobooks.com and become a monthly supporter for as little as $5 a month. As a thank you gesture, we'll send you a coupon code every month for $8 off any audiobook order. Give more and you get more. Thanks for helping us out. Go to classictalesaudiobooks.com and become a supporter today. We are going to have a short story summer. Through the summer, we'll be showcasing the best short stories from 1919 to 1923. Today's story was written by Richard Connell. You may recognize him from his famous story, The Most Dangerous Game. Connell was one of the most popular short story writers of his time. He went on to have similar luck as a screenwriter, being nominated for an Academy Award in 1942 for his script Meet John Doe, based on his short story, A Reputation. And now, A Friend of Napoleon by Richard Connell. All Paris held no happier man than Papa Chibou. He loved his work, that is why. Other men might say, and did say, in fact, that for no amount of money would they take his job. No, not for 10,000 francs for a single night. It would turn their hair white and give them permanent goose flesh, they averred. On such men, Papa Chibou smiled with pity. What stomach had such zestless ones for adventure? What did they know of romance? Every night of his life, Papa Chibou walked with adventure and held the hand of romance. Every night, he conversed intimately with Napoleon, with Narr and his fellow revolutionists, with Carpentier and Caesar, with Victor Hugo and Lloyd George, with Foch and with Bigard, the Apache murderer whose unfortunate penchant for making ladies into curry led him to the guillotine, with Louis XVI, and with Madame La Blanche, who poisoned 11 husbands and was working to make it an even dozen when the police deterred her, with Marie Antoinette, and with sundry early Christian martyrs, who lived in sweet resignation in electric-lighted catacombs under the sidewalk of the Boulevard des Capucines, in the very heart of Paris. They were all his friends, and he had a word and a joke for each of them, as on his nightly rounds he washed their faces and dusted out their ears. For Papa Chibou was night watchman at the Musée Pratussi, the world in wax. Admission, 1 franc. Children and soldiers, half price. Nervous ladies enter the Chamber of Horrors at their own risk. One is prayed not to touch the wax figures or to permit dogs to circulate in the establishment. He had been at the Musée Pratussi so long that he looked like a wax figure himself. Visitors not infrequently mistook him for one and poked him with inquisitive fingers or canes. He did not undeceive them. He did not budge. Spartan-like he stood stiff under the pokes. He was rather proud of being taken for a citizen of the world of wax, which was indeed a much more real world to him than the world of flesh and blood. He had cheeks like the small red wax pippins used in table decorations, round eyes, slightly poppy, and smooth white hair, like a wig. He was a diminutive man, and with his horseshoe mustache of surprising luxuriance, looked like a gnome going to a fancy dress ball as a small walrus. Children who saw him flitting about the dim passages that led to the catacombs were sure he was a brownie. His title, Papa, was a purely honorary one, given him because he had worked some 25 years at the museum, He was unwed and slept at the museum in a niche of a room just off the Roman arena, where papier-mâché lions and tigers breakfasted on assorted martyrs. At night, he dusted off the lions and tigers. He rebuked them sternly for their lack of delicacy. "Ah," he would say, cuffing the ear of the largest lion, who was earnestly trying to devour a grandfather and an infant simultaneously. "Sort of a pig that you are! I am ashamed of you, eater of babies. You will go to hell for this, Monsieur Lion. You may depend upon it. Monsieur Satan will poach you like an egg, I promise you. You bad one, you species of a camel, you Apache, you profiteer!" Then Papa Chibou would bend over and very tenderly address the elderly martyr who was lying beneath the lion's paws and exhibiting signs of distress, and say, "Patience, my brave one. It does not take long to be eaten, and then consider. The good Lord will take you up to heaven, and there, if you wish, you yourself can eat a lion every day. You are a man of holiness, Philibert. You will be Saint Philibert, beyond doubt. And then won't you laugh at lions?" Philibert was the name Papa Chibou had given to the venerable martyr. He had bestowed names on all of them. Having consoled Philibert, he would softly dust the fat wax infant, whom the lion was in the act of bolting. "Courage, my poor little Jacob," Papa Chibou would say. "It is not every baby that can be eaten by a lion, and in such a good cause, too. Don't cry, little Jacob. And remember, when you get inside Monsieur Lion, kick and kick and kick. That will give him a great sickness of the stomach. Won't that be fun, little Jacob?" So he went about his work, chatting with them all, for he was fond of them all, even of Bigard, the Apache, and the other grisly inmates of the Chamber of Horrors. He did chide the criminals for their regrettable proclivities in the past, and warned them that he would tolerate no such conduct in his museum. It was not his museum, of course. The owner was Monsieur Pratoussy, a long-necked, melancholy marabout of a man who sat at the ticket window and took in the francs. But though the legal title to the place might be vested in Monsieur Pratoussy, at night Papa Chibou was the undisputed monarch of his little wax kingdom. When the last patron had left and the doors were closed, Papa Chibou began to pay calls on his subjects. Across the silent halls he called greetings to them. "Ah, Bigard, you old rascal! How goes the world? And you, Madame Marie-Antoinette? Did you enjoy a good day? Good evening, Monsieur Caesar. Aren't you chilly in that costume of yours? Ah, Monsieur Charlemagne, I trust your health continues to be of the best." His closest friend of them all was Napoleon. The others he liked. To Napoleon he was devoted. It was a friendship cemented by the years, for Napoleon had been in the museum as long as Papa Chibou. Other figures might come and go at the behest of a fickle public, but Napoleon held his place, albeit he had been relegated to a dim corner. He was not much of a Napoleon. He was smaller even than the original Napoleon, and one of his ears had come in contact with a steam radiator, and as a result it was gnarled into a lump the size of a hickory nut. It was a perfect example of that phenomenon of the prize ring, the cauliflower ear. He was supposed to be at St. Helena, and he stood on a papier-mâché rock, gazing out wistfully over a non-existent sea. One hand was thrust into the bosom of his long-tailed coat, the other hung at his side. Skin-tight breeches, once white but white no longer, fitted snugly over his plump bump of waxen abdomen. A Napoleonic hat, frayed by years of conscientious brushing by Papa Chibou, was perched above a pensive, waxen brow. Papa Chibou had been attracted to Napoleon from the first. There was something so forlorn about him. Papa Chibou had been forlorn, too, in his first days at the museum. He had come from Boulogne, in the south of France, to seek his fortune as a grower of asparagus in Paris. He was a simple man, of scant schooling, and he had fancied that there were asparagus beds along the Paris boulevards. There were none. So necessity and chance brought him to the Museum Pratussi to earn his bread and wine, and romance and his friendship for Napoleon kept him there. The first day Papa Chibou worked at the museum, Monsieur Pratussi took him round to tell him about the figures. "This," said the proprietor, "is Toulon the Strangler. This is Mademoiselle Merle, who shot the Russian Duke. This is Charlotte Corday, who stabbed Marat in the bathtub. That gory gentleman is Marat." Then they had come to Napoleon. Monsieur Pratussi was passing him by. "And who is this sad-looking gentleman?" asked Papa Chibou. "Name of a name, do you not know?" "But no, monsieur." "But that is Napoleon himself." That night, his first in the museum, Papa Chibou went round and said to Napoleon, "Monsieur, I do not know with what crimes you are charged, but I, for one, refuse to think you are guilty of them." So began their friendship. Thereafter, he dusted Napoleon with especial care and made him his confidant. One night, in his 25th year at the museum, Papa Chibou said to Napoleon, "You observed those two lovers who were in here tonight, did you not, my good Napoleon? They thought it was too dark in this corner for us to see, didn't they? But we saw him take her hand and whisper to her. Did she blush? You were near enough to see. She is pretty, isn't she, with her bright, dark eyes? She is not a French girl, she is an American. One can tell that by the way she doesn't roll her R's. The young man, he is French, and a fine young fellow he is, or I'm no judge. He is so slender and erect, and he has courage, for he wears the war cross. You noticed that, didn't you? He is very much in love, that is sure. This is not the first time I have seen them. They have met here before, and they are wise, for is this not a spot most romantic for the meetings of lovers?" Papa Chibou flicked a speck of dust from Napoleon's good ear. "Ah," he exclaimed, "it must be a thing most delicious to be young and in love. Were you ever in love, Napoleon? No? Ah, what a pity. I know, for I, too, have had no luck in love. Ladies prefer the big, strong men, don't they? Well, we must help these two young people, Napoleon. We must see that they have the joy we missed. So, do not let them know you are watching them if they come here tomorrow night. I will pretend I do not see." Each night after the museum had closed, Papa Chibou gossiped with Napoleon about the progress of the love affair between the American girl with the bright dark eyes and the slender, erect young Frenchman. "All is not going well," Papa Chibou reported one night, shaking his head. "There are obstacles to their happiness. He has little money, for he is just beginning his career. I heard him tell her so tonight. And she has an aunt who has other plans for her. What a pity if fate should part them. But you know how unfair fate can be, don't you, Napoleon? If only we had some money, we might be able to help him, but I myself have no money, and I suppose that you too were poor, since you look so sad. But attend. Tomorrow is a day most important for them. He has asked her if she will marry him, and she has said that she will tell him tomorrow night at 9 in this very place. I heard them arrange it all. If she does not come, it will mean no. I think we shall see two very happy ones here tomorrow night, eh, Napoleon?" The next night, when the last patron had gone, and Papa Chibou had locked the outer door, he came to Napoleon, and tears were in his eyes. "You saw, my friend?" broke out Papa Chibou. "You observed? You saw his face, and how pale it grew? You saw his eyes, and how they held 1,000 agonies. He waited until I had to tell him 3 times that the museum was closing. I felt like an executioner, I assure you. And he looked up at me as only a man condemned can look. He went out with heavy feet. He was no longer erect, for she did not come, Napoleon. That girl with the bright dark eyes did not come. Our little comedy of love has become a tragedy, monsieur. She has refused him, that unhappy young man." On the following night at closing time, Papa Chibou came hurrying to Napoleon. He was aquiver with excitement. "She was here!" he cried. "Did you see her? She was here, and she kept watching and watching, but of course he did not come. I could tell from his stricken face last night that he had no hope. At last I dared to speak to her. I said to her, 'Mademoiselle, 1,000 pardons for the very great liberty I am taking, but it is my duty to tell you. He was here last night, and he waited till closing time. He was all of a paleness, mademoiselle, and he chewed his fingers in his despair. He loves you, mademoiselle. A cow could see that. He is devoted to you, and he is a fine young fellow. You can take an old man's word for it. Do not break his heart, mademoiselle." She grasped my sleeve. "You know him, then?" she asked. "You know where I can find him?" "Alas, no," I said. "I have only seen him here with you." "Poor boy," she kept saying. "Poor boy, oh, what shall I do? I am in dire trouble. I love him, monsieur." "But you did not come," I said. "I could not," she replied, and she was weeping. "I live with an aunt. A rich tiger she is, monsieur, and she wants me to marry a count, a fat, leering fellow who smells of attar, of roses and garlic. My aunt locked me in my room, and now I have lost the one I love. For he will think I have refused him, and he is so proud he will never ask me again." "But surely you could let him know," I suggested. "But I do not know where he lives," she said. "And in a few days my aunt is taking me off to Rome, where the Count is, and oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." And she wept on my shoulder, Napoleon, that poor little American girl with the dark, bright eyes. Papa Chibou began to brush the Napoleonic hat. "I tried to comfort her," he said. "I told her that the young man would surely find her, that he would come back and haunt the spot where they had been happy, but I was telling her what I did not believe. 'He may come tonight,' I said, 'or tomorrow.' She waited until it was time to close the museum. You saw her face as she left. Did it not touch you in the heart?" Papa Chibou was downcast when he approached Napoleon the next night. "She waited again till closing time," he said, "but he did not come. It made me suffer to see her as the hours went by, and her hope ebbed away. At last she had to leave, and at the door she said to me, 'If you see him here again, please give him this.' She handed me this card, Napoleon. See, it says, 'I am at the Villa Rosina, Rome. I love you, Nina.' Ah, the poor, poor young man. We must keep a sharp watch for him, you and I." Papa Chibou and Napoleon did watch at the Musée Pratussi night after night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nights they watched for him. A week, a month, more months passed, and he did not come. There came instead one day news of so terrible a nature that it left Papa Chibou ill and trembling. The Musée Pratussi was going to have to close its doors. "It's no use," said Monsieur Pratussi, when he dealt this blow to Papa Chibou. "I cannot go on. Already I owe much, and my creditors are clamoring. People will no longer pay a franc to see a few old dummies when they can see an army of Red Indians, Arabs, brigands, and dukes in the moving pictures. Monday, the Musée Pratussi closes its doors forever." "But, Monsieur Pratussi," exclaimed Papa Chibou, aghast, "what about the people here? What will become of Marie Antoinette and the martyrs and Napoleon?" "Oh," said the proprietor, "I'll be able to realize a little on them, perhaps. On Tuesday they will be sold at auction. Someone may buy them to melt up." "To melt up, monsieur?" Papa Chibou faltered. "But certainly. What else are they good for?" "But surely monsieur will want to keep them, a few of them anyhow." "Keep them? And to the devil, but that is a droll idea. Why should anyone want to keep shabby old wax dummies?" "I thought," murmured Papa Chibou, "that you might keep just one. Napoleon, for example,
As a remembrance, uncle of Satan, but you have odd notions. To keep a souvenir of one's bankruptcy.
Papa Chibou went away to his little hole in the wall. He sat on his cot and fingered his mustache for an hour. The news had left him dizzy, had made a cold vacuum under his belt buckle. From under his cot, at last, he took a wooden box, unlocked 3 separate locks, and extracted a sock. From the sock he took his fortune, his hoard of big copper 10-centime pieces, tips he had saved for years. He counted them over 5 times, most carefully. But no matter how he counted them, he could not make the total come to more than 221 francs. That night, he did not tell Napoleon the news. He did not tell any of them. Indeed, he acted even more cheerful than usual as he went from one figure to another. He complimented Madame Leblanche, the lady of the poisoned spouses, on how well she was looking. He even had a kindly word to say to the lion that was eating the 2 martyrs.
"After all, Monsieur Lion," he said, "I suppose it is as proper for you to eat martyrs as it is for me to eat bananas. Probably bananas do not enjoy being eaten any more than martyrs do. In the past I have said harsh things to you, Monsieur Lion. I am sorry I said them now. After all, it is hardly your fault that you eat people. You were born with an appetite for martyrs, just as I was born poor."
And he gently tweaked the lion's papier-mâché ear. When he came to Napoleon, Papa Chibou brushed him with unusual care and thoroughness. With a moistened cloth he polished the imperial nose, and he took pains to be gentle with the cauliflower ear. He told Napoleon the latest joke he had heard at the cabman's café, where he ate his breakfast of onion soup, and, as the joke was mildly improper, nudged Napoleon in the ribs and winked at him.
"We are men of the world, hey, old friend?" said Papa Chibou. "We are philosophers, is that not so?"
Then he added,
"We take what life sends us, and sometimes it sends hardnesses."
He wanted to talk more with Napoleon, but somehow he couldn't. Abruptly, in the midst of a joke, Papa Chibou broke off and hurried down into the depths of the Chamber of Horrors, and stood there for a very long time, staring at an unfortunate native of Siam being trodden on by an elephant. It was not until the morning of the auction sale that Papa Chibou told Napoleon. Then, while the crowd was gathering, he slipped up to Napoleon in his corner and laid his hand on Napoleon's arm.
"One of the hardnesses of life has come to us, old friend," he said. "They are going to try to take you away. But courage! Papa Chibou does not desert his friends. Listen."
And Papa Chibou patted his pocket, which gave forth a jingling sound. The bidding began. Close to the auctioneer's desk stood a man, a wizened, rodent-eyed man with a diamond ring and dirty fingers. Papa Chibou's heart went down like an express elevator when he saw him, for he knew that the rodent-eyed man was Mogan, the junk king of Paris. The auctioneer, in a voice slightly encumbered by adenoids, began to sell the various items in a hurried, perfunctory manner.
"Item 3 is Julius Caesar, toga and sandals thrown in. How much am I offered? 150 francs? Dirt cheap for a Roman emperor, that is. Who'll make it 200? Thank you, Monsieur Mogan. The noblest Roman of them all is going at 200 francs. Are you all through at 200? Going? Gone. Julius Caesar is sold to Monsieur Mogan."
Papa Chibou patted Caesar's back sympathetically.
"You are worth more, my good Julius," he said in a whisper. "Goodbye."
He was encouraged. If a comparatively new Caesar brought only 200, surely an old Napoleon would bring no more. The sale progressed rapidly. Monsieur Mogan bought the entire Chamber of Horrors. He bought Marie Antoinette and the martyrs and lions. Papa Chibou, standing near Napoleon, withstood the strain of waiting by chewing his mustache. The sale was very nearly over, and Monsieur Mogan had bought every item, when, with a yawn, the auctioneer droned,
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to item 573, a collection of odds and ends, mostly damaged goods, to be sold in one lot. The lot includes one stuffed owl that seems to have molted a bit, one Spanish shawl, torn, the head of an Apache who has been guillotined, body missing, a small wax camel, no humps, and an old wax figure of Napoleon with one ear damaged. What am I offered for the lot?" Papa Chibou's heart stood still. He laid a reassuring hand on Napoleon's shoulder. "The fool," he whispered in Napoleon's good ear, "to put you in the same class as a camel, no humps, and an owl. But never mind. It is lucky for us, perhaps." "How much for this assortment?" asked the auctioneer. 100 francs, said Mauguin, the junk king. 150, said Papa Chibou, trying to be calm. He had never spent so vast a sum all at once in his life. Mauguin fingered the material in Napoleon's coat. 200, said the junk king. "Are you all through at 200? queried the auctioneer. 221, called Papa Chibou. His voice was a husky squeak. Mauguin from his rodent eyes glared at Papa Chibou with annoyance and contempt. He raised his dirtiest finger, the one with a diamond ring on it, toward the auctioneer. "Monsieur Mauguin bids 225, droned the auctioneer. "Do I hear 250? Papa Chibou hated the world. The auctioneer cast a look in his direction. 225 is bid, he repeated. "Are you all through at 225? Going? Going? Sold to Monsieur Mauguin for 225 francs. Stunned, Papa Chibou heard Mauguin say casually, "I'll send round my carts for this stuff in the morning." This stuff! Dully, and with an aching breast, Papa Chibou went to his room down by the Roman arena. He packed his few clothes into a box. Last of all, he slowly took from his cap the brass badge he had worn for so many years. It bore the words, Chief Watchman. He had been proud of that title, even if it was slightly inaccurate. He had been not only the chief, but the only watchman. Now, he was nothing. It was hours before he summoned up the energy to take his box round to the room he had rented, high up under the roof of a tenement in a nearby alley. He knew he should start to look for another job at once, but he could not force himself to do so that day. Instead, he stole back to the deserted museum and sat down on a bench by the side of Napoleon. Silently, he sat there all night. But he did not sleep. He was thinking. And the thought that kept pecking at his brain was to him a shocking one. At last, as day began to edge its pale way through the dusty windows of the museum, Papa Chibou stood up with the air of a man who has been through a mental struggle and has made up his mind. "Napoleon," he said, "we have been friends for a quarter of a century, and now we are to be separated because a stranger had 4 francs more than I had. That may be lawful, my old friend, but it is not justice. You and I, we are not going to be parted." Paris was not yet awake when Papa Chibou stole with infinite caution into the narrow street beside the museum. Along this street, toward the tenement where he had taken a room, crept Papa Chibou. Sometimes he had to pause for breath, for in his arms he was carrying Napoleon. 2 policemen came to arrest Papa Chibou that very afternoon. Mauguin had missed Napoleon, and he was a shrewd man. There was not the slightest doubt of Papa Chibou's guilt. There stood Napoleon in the corner of his room, gazing pensively out over the housetops. The police bundled the overwhelmed and confused Papa Chibou into the police patrol, and with him, as damning evidence, Napoleon. In his cell in the city prison, Papa Chibou sat with his spirit caved in. To him, jails and judges and justice were terrible and mysterious affairs. He wondered if he would be guillotined. Perhaps not, since his long life had been one of blameless conduct. But the least he could expect, he reasoned, was a long sentence to hard labor on Devil's Island,
and guillotining had certain advantages over that. Perhaps it would be better to be guillotined, he told himself, now that Napoleon was sure to be melted up. The keeper who brought him his meal of stew was a pessimist of jocular tendencies. "A pretty pickle," said the keeper, "and at your age, too. You must be a very wicked old man to go about stealing dummies. What will be safe now? One may expect to find the Eiffel Tower missing any morning. Dummy stealing, what a career! We have had a man in here who stole a trolley car, and one who made off with the anchor of a steamship, and even one who pilfered a hippopotamus from a zoo, but never one who stole a dummy, and an old one-eared dummy at that. It is an affair extraordinary."
"And what did they do to the gentleman who stole the hippopotamus?" inquired Papa Chibou tremulously.
The keeper scratched his head to indicate thought. "I think," he said, "that they boiled him alive. Either that or they transported him for life to Morocco. I don't recall exactly." Papa Chibou's brow grew damp. "It was a trial most comical, I can assure you," went on the keeper. "The judges were Messieurs Bertouf, Gobelin, and Pérouse. Very amusing fellows, all three of them. They had fun with the prisoner. How I laughed! Judge Bertouf said, in sentencing him, 'We must be severe with you, pilferer of hippopotamuses. We must make of you an example. This business of hippopotamus pilfering is getting all too common in Paris.' They are witty fellows, those judges." Papa Chibou grew a shade paler.
"The terrible trio?"
he asked. "The terrible trio," replied the keeper cheerfully.
"Will they be my judges?"
asked Papa Chibou. "Most assuredly," promised the keeper, and strolled away humming happily and rattling his big keys. Papa Chibou knew then that there was no hope for him. Even into the Musée Pratussi the reputation of those three judges had penetrated, and it was a sinister reputation indeed. They were three ancient, grim men who had fairly earned their title, the Terrible Trio, by the severity of their sentences. Evildoers blanched at their names, and this was a matter of pride to them. Shortly the keeper came back. He was grinning. "You have the devil's own luck, old-timer," he said to Papa Chibou. "First you have to be tried by the Terrible Trio, and then you get assigned to you as lawyer none other than Monsieur Georges de Fayel."
"And this Monsieur de Fayel, is he then not a good lawyer?"
questioned Papa Chibou miserably. The keeper snickered. "He has not won a case for months," he answered, as if it were the most amusing thing imaginable. "It is really better than a circus to hear him muddling up his client's affairs in court. His mind is not on the case at all. Heaven knows where it is. When he rises to plead before the judges, he has no fire, no passion. He mumbles and stutters. It is a saying about the courts that one is as good as convicted who has the ill luck to draw Monsieur Georges du Fayel as his advocate. Still, if one is too poor to pay for a lawyer, one must take what he can get. That's philosophy, eh, old-timer?" Papa Chibou groaned. "Oh, wait till tomorrow," said the keeper gaily. "Then you'll have a real reason to groan."
"But surely I can see this Monsieur du Fayel."
"Oh, what's the use? You stole the dummy, didn't you? It will be there in court to appear against you. How entertaining. Witness for the prosecution, Monsieur Napoleon. You are plainly as guilty as Cain, old-timer, and the judges will boil your cabbage for you very quickly and neatly, I can promise you that. Well, see you tomorrow. Sleep well." Papa Chibou did not sleep well. He did not sleep at all, in fact. And when they marched him into the enclosure where sat the other nondescript offenders against the law, he was shaken and utterly wretched. He was overawed by the great courtroom and the thick atmosphere of seriousness that hung over it. He did pluck up enough courage to ask a guard,
"Where is my lawyer, Monsieur du Fayel?"
"Oh, he's late, as usual," replied the guard. And then, for he was a waggish fellow, he added, "If you're lucky, he won't come at all." Papa Chibou sank down on the prisoner's bench and raised his eyes to the tribunal opposite. His very marrow was chilled by the sight of the terrible trio. The chief judge, Bertouf, was a vast puff of a man who swelled out of his judicial chair like a poisonous fungus. His black robe was familiar with spilled brandy, and his dirty judicial bib was askew. His face was bibulous and brutal, and he had the wattles of a turkey gobbler. Judge Gobelin, on his right, looked to have mummified. He was at least 100 years old, and had wrinkled parchment skin and red-rimmed eyes that glittered like the eyes of a cobra. Judge Perouse was one vast jungle of tangled, grizzled whisker, from the midst of which projected a cockatoo's beak of a nose. He looked at Papa Chibou and licked his lips with a long pink tongue. Papa Chibou all but fainted. He felt no bigger than a pea, and less important. As for his judges, they seemed enormous monsters. The first case was called. A young swaggering fellow who had stolen an orange from a pushcart. "Ah, Monsieur Thief," rumbled Judge Bertouf with a scowl. "You are jaunty now. Will you be so jaunty a year from today, when you are released from prison? I think rather not. Next case." Papa Chibou's heart pumped with difficulty. A year for an orange, and he had stolen a man. His eyes roved round the room, and he saw two guards carrying in something which they stood before the judges. It was Napoleon. A guard tapped Papa Chibou on the shoulder. "You're next," he said. "But my lawyer, Monsieur Dufayel," began Papa Chibou. "You're in hard luck," said the guard, "for here he comes." Papa Chibou, in a daze, found himself in the prisoner's dock. He saw coming toward him a pale young man. Papa Chibou recognized him at once. It was the slender, erect young man of the museum. He was not very erect now. He was listless. He did not recognize Papa Chibou. He barely glanced at him. "You stole something," said the young lawyer, and his voice was toneless. "The stolen goods were found in your room. I think we might better plead guilty and get it over with." "Yes, monsieur," said Papa Chibou, for he had let go all his hold on hope. "But attend a moment. I have something, a message for you." Papa Chibou fumbled through his pockets and at last found the card of the American girl with the bright, dark eyes. He handed it to Georges Dufayel. "She left it with me to give to you," said Papa Chibou. "I was chief watchman at the Musée Pratussi, you know. She came there night after night to wait for you." The young man gripped the sides of the card with both hands. His face, his eyes, everything about him suddenly seemed charged with new life. 10,000 million devils!" he cried. "And I doubted her! I owe you much, monsieur. I owe you everything." He wrung Papa Chibou's hand. Judge Bertouf gave an impatient judicial grunt. "We are ready to hear your case, Advocate Dufayel," said the judge, "if you have one." The court attendants sniggered. "A little moment, monsieur the judge," said the lawyer. He turned to Papa Chibou. "Quick," he shot out. "Tell me about the crime you are charged with. What did you steal?" "Him," replied Papa Chibou, pointing. "That dummy of Napoleon?" Papa Chibou nodded. "But why?" Papa Chibou shrugged his shoulders. "Monsieur could not understand." "But you must tell me," said the lawyer urgently. "I must make a plea for you. These savages will be severe enough in any event, but I may be able to do something. Quick, why did you steal this Napoleon?" "I was his friend," said Papa Chibou. "The museum failed. They were going to sell Napoleon for junk, Monsieur Dufayel. He was my friend. I could not desert him." The eyes of the young advocate had caught fire. They were lit with a flash. He brought his fist down on the table. "Enough!" he cried. Then he rose in his place and addressed the court. His voice was low, vibrant, and passionate. The judges, in spite of themselves, leaned forward to listen to him. "May it please the honorable judges of this court of France," he began, "my client is guilty. Yes, I repeat in a voice of thunder for all France to hear, for the enemies of France to hear, for the whole wide world to hear, he is guilty. He did steal this figure of Napoleon, the lawful property of another. I do not deny it. This old man, Jerome Chibou, is guilty, and I, for one, am proud of his guilt. Judge Bertouf grunted. "If your client is guilty, Advocate Dufayel," he said, "that settles it. Despite your pride in his guilt, which is a peculiar notion, I confess, I am going to sentence him to—" "But wait, Your Honor." Dufayel's voice was compelling. You shall hear me. Before you pass sentence on this old man, let me ask you a question." "Well?" "Are you a Frenchman, Judge Bertouf?" "But certainly." "And you love France?" "Monsieur has not the effrontery to suggest otherwise." "No, I was sure of it. That is why you will listen to me." "I listen." "I repeat, then, Jerome Chibou is guilty. In the law's eyes, he is a criminal. But in the eyes of France and those who love her, his guilt is a glorious guilt. His guilt is more honorable than innocence itself." The three judges looked at one another blankly. Papa Chibou regarded his lawyer with wide eyes. Georges Dufayel spoke on. "These are times of turmoil and change in our country, messieurs the judges. Proud traditions, which were once the birthright of every Frenchman, have been allowed to decay. Enemies beset us within and without. Youth grows careless of that honor which is the soul of a nation. Youth forgets the priceless heritages of the ages, the great names that once brought glory to France in the past, when Frenchmen were Frenchmen. There are some in France who may have forgotten the respect due a nation's great—" Here Advocate Dufayel looked very hard at the judges. "But there are a few patriots left who have not forgotten, and there sits one of them. This poor old man has deep within him a glowing devotion to France. You may say that he is a simple, unlettered peasant. You may say that he is a thief. But I say, and true Frenchmen will say it with me, that he is a patriot, messieurs the judges. He loves Napoleon. He loves him for what he did for France. He loves him because in Napoleon burned that spirit which has made France great. There was a time, messieurs the judges, when your fathers and mine dared share that love for a great leader. Need I remind you of the career of Napoleon? I know I need not. Need I tell you of his victories? I know I need not." Nevertheless, Advocate Dufayel did tell them of the career of Napoleon. With a wealth of detail and many gestures, he traced the rise of Napoleon. He lingered over his battles. For an hour and 10 minutes he spoke eloquently of Napoleon and his part in the history of France. "You may have forgotten," he concluded, "and others may have forgotten, but this old man sitting here a prisoner, he did not forget. When mercenary scoundrels wanted to throw on the junk heap this effigy of one of France's greatest sons, who was it that saved him? Was it you, messieurs the judges? Was it I? Alas, no. It was a poor old man who loved Napoleon more than he loved himself. Consider, messieurs the judges, they were going to throw on the junk heap Napoleon. France's Napoleon, our Napoleon. Who would save him? Then rose up this man, this Jerome Chibou, whom you would brand as a thief. And he cried aloud for France and for the whole world to hear, 'Stop, desecrators of Napoleon, stop! There still lives one Frenchman who loves the memories of his native land. There is still one patriot left. I, Jerome Chibou, will save Napoleon.' And he did save him, messieurs the judges." Advocate Dufayel mopped his brow, and leveling an accusing finger at the terrible trio, he said, "You may send Jerome Chibou to jail. But when you do, remember this. You are sending to jail the spirit of France. You may find Jerome Chibou guilty, but when you do, Remember this. You are condemning a man for love of country, for love of France. Whether true hearts beat in French bosoms, messieurs the judges, there will the crime of Jerome Chibou be understood, and there will the name of Jerome Chibou be honored. Put him in prison, messieurs the judges, load his poor feeble old body with chains, and a nation will tear down the prison walls, break his chains, and pay homage to the man who loved Napoleon and France so much that he was willing to sacrifice himself on the altar of patriotism. Advocate Dufayel sat down. Papa Chibou raised his eyes to the judge's bench. Judge Perouse was ostentatiously blowing his beak of a nose. Judge Gobelin, who wore a sedan ribbon in his buttonhole, was sniffing into his inkwell. And Chief Judge Bertouf was openly blubbering. "Jerome Chibou, stand up." It was Chief Judge Bertouf who spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion. Papa Chibou, quaking, stood up. A hand like a hand of pink bananas was thrust down at him. "Jerome Chibou," said Chief Judge Bertouf, "I find you guilty. Your crime is patriotism in the first degree. I sentence you to freedom. Let me have the honor of shaking the hand of a true Frenchman." "And I," said Judge Gobelin, thrusting out a hand as dry as autumn leaves. "And I also," said Judge Perouse, reaching out a hairy hand. "And furthermore," said Chief Judge Bertouf, "you shall continue to protect the Napoleon you saved. I subscribe 100 francs to buy him for you." "And I," said Judge Gobelin. "And I also," said Judge Perouse. As they left the courtroom, Advocate Dufayel, Papa Chibou, and Napoleon, Papa Chibou turned to his lawyer. "I can never repay, monsieur," he began. "Nonsense," said the lawyer. "And would Monsieur Dufayel mind telling me again the last name of Napoleon?" "Why, Bonaparte, of course. Surely you knew—" "Alas, no, Monsieur Dufayel. I am a man the most ignorant. I did not know that my friend had done such great things." "You didn't? Then what in the name of heaven did you think Napoleon was?" "A sort of murderer," said Papa Chibou humbly. Out beyond the walls of Paris, in a garden, stands the villa of Georges Dufayel, who has become, everyone says, the most eloquent and successful young lawyer in the Paris courts. He lives there with his wife, who has bright, dark eyes. To get to his house, one must pass a tiny gatehouse, where lives a small old man with a prodigious walrus mustache. Visitors who peer into the gatehouse as they pass sometimes get a shock, for standing in one corner of its only room, they see another small man, in uniform and a big hat. He never moves, but stands there by the window all day, one hand in the bosom of his coat, the other at his side, while his eyes look out over the garden. He is waiting for Papa Chibou to come home after his work among the asparagus beds, to tell him the jokes and the news of the day. This is B.J. Harrison. I hope you've enjoyed this unabridged production of A Friend of Napoleon by Richard Connell. If you've enjoyed this episode, you may also enjoy The Blue Cross by G.K. Chesterton, available for free in your podcast feed. Thank you for joining me today and allowing classic literature to awaken your better self. Please join me next time, and we'll rediscover the greatest stories ever put to paper.